Now, today we're going to get really into the business of sport in a little bit on the player side. Obviously, representing players, you've dealt with lots of it, and I want to talk a little bit about Calvin Pickard's situation. Of course, being in Edmonton for a few years, and the business of sport can be ugly at times, and can be challenging for players. I know Leon Draisaitl talked about it. One of his best friends on the team is Calvin Pickard. They're really close. He's beloved by his teammates. A really funny guy, and they brought in 2 other goalies, so then he was kind of relegated to number 3. Then he's put on waivers, and he hasn't claimed. Were you having conversations with Stan Bowman? Are you ever looking at trade potentially rather than waivers? How does that work?
Well, this situation is a bit unusual because in the conversations I've had with Stan, he's not sure Calvin's not number 1. He just got into a situation where, right now the coach has got flavors, favors lemonade and strawberry, is not sure on grape, and there's not a lot of difference between them. Their statistics are very similar. The issue that I had with it was it didn't make sense to me when you could have sent Ingram down. Now they got Calvin through waivers, so that worked out okay. But if you look at Calvin's, there's so many factors that come into winning. We've heard it for 2 years. Every time Calvin's in the net, everybody says the guys play better because they love him, because they want him to succeed. Now, that shouldn't be the case, but it appears to be the case. He's a glue figure in the dressing room. Draisaitl texted posted on Instagram within seconds of him clearing waivers, maybe the best teammate we've all ever had. You can't deny the value of that when you get down a couple of games in the playoffs. Now, so I looked at it and talked to Stan. He's 9-2 in the playoffs. Do we forget? These guys have never had much playoff success. Ingram hasn't hardly played in the playoffs. His last 3 games starting to come around. First star against Winnipeg, played really well. In his last 3 games, I think he was 9.5 save percentage, thereabouts. So you start looking at it and say, geez, he seems to be coming around at a time when the team's starting to play better, which they didn't do in Winnipeg. How many games has a goalie stolen for this team this year? It might be that only game. I'm not sure. There may be a couple of others. So it didn't, so what we did is you got to evaluate. This is the same thing that Connor McDavid had to go through in the summer in a different context. He said candidly he wants to play with his friends and win, right? So he would have had to evaluate the probability of that. I think he probably would have came to the conclusion it's not top shelf. It's maybe okay. We've been there twice, not as strong as we were last year. But then you have to go to the other side of the equation and say, okay, well, if I'm not going to sign in Edmonton, where else? There's 24 teams boxed right out of the game because they're not winning. And then there's some with cap issues. It's not easy. So when Calvin went on waivers, we decided, do we talk to another teams? Do we rush it? Well, no, we don't, because ultimately he has a great relationship with the people here. He's had success here. And everybody thinks there's not enough differentiation between the 3 of them to suggest any other place is a good place to go, right? So we talked about it. Calvin's pretty level-headed about it. And, this is not something that's unfamiliar to him, It might break another guy. It'll just motivate him. And I just said to him simply, when he went off for his break and I went off for mine, I just said, let's do lunch during the playoffs because he'll be here. And I say that with conviction because I have 47 All-Star Game appearances, 6 Vezina trophies, 2 league MVPs, 1 Norris Trophy, 3 Conn Smythe trophies, and 82 Stanley Cup rings won by guys who have waived and cleared, were bought out, or never drafted. I know my players. I think Stan knows this player. I think that they're not sure what to do in the blue paint. And Calvin's more likely to play here and have playoff success than anywhere else. So he'll do what he has to do. He's done it in the past, and I don't think there's any doubt. But, there's lots of conversations about it. It's disappointing for him, obviously, because I don't know if, there's not enough evidence that says, yes, the other guys are better. Which one of them has won? Collectively, they haven't won 9 games in the playoffs, have they?
Well, no. Jari's only ever played 8 playoff games.
But that's the issue, is because you have to go sometimes a little, and I think that the culture thing is so big, right? These guys knew the last 2 seasons when Calvin went into a big game, when their season was in really tough shape, they know what he did. He delivered. They don't know that about the other guys. How are they going to play in front of them? How nervous are they going to be? How will they play differently? Will they have the confidence that they can? I don't think so. And ultimately, that will make sense to the coaching staff, I would think. I'm not a big fan of the way they handle it, but they've got to do their job too.
Looking at the situation with Pickard. So now I know he doesn't legally or technically, I guess, have to report to Bakersfield until the 17th. Because I know, similar to the NHL players that would come back, they got an optional skate on the 17th or 18th, and then they go. Being a veteran, well, when he comes back, because I know he had a planned family trip like lots of the players.
Yeah.
Will he be given more time to go down? How does that work?
Well, no, there's a good chance he'll take less time. And Calvin's a very competitive guy. He's gone off with his family for a vacation. I think there's a high probability he might just head down a little bit early. Now the rules require him now to play one game before he comes back. So he's going to have to go down and play another game regardless of what happens. So he'll do that for sure. And, it's just up, as far as I'm concerned, it's just up. Time will heal this whole thing. The other goalies will do what they've done. Nothing. Right. And somebody will figure it out. Hey, we had a guy here who's doing the same as this. He's loved by all his teammates. He's delivered in his playoffs. Hey, does anybody have his number? Where is he? Oh, he's down in Bakersfield. Who sent him down there? Coach, you actually sent him down there. Oh, well, you guys got to call him. I mean, I think I'm being facetious a little bit, but that's going to happen. I have no doubt. I was with, Calvin's not Dominic Hasek, but I've been with some players who are in tough spots and ended up winning things like Vezina trophies. Calvin's a good backup. He's a good guy in the crunch, and he's solid and emotional. I remember I laughed because I asked him last year, because everywhere he goes, everybody talks about how much they love him. And I said, so what goes on in that room, man? Like, you have to tell me. He just looked at me very slyly and said, you know what goes on in the room stays in the room. You know that. I just said, like, seriously. But, he just is an asset. That culture thing is so important. We had Steve Hauskon, right, last year, talking about, the former Seattle Seahawks kicker who won the Super Bowl with them. He's now working with the same guy that was a culture coach that led them to their last championship. Now, Mike went off to do other things, and Steve and he have been working together. They brought him back this year. Another culture reinstated, culture reformatted, rebuilt, and I think they would tell you, not determinative, but a huge factor. These games in the playoffs, a bad performance by Pickard in one of those series last year, they don't make it past the second round. It's not small.
Oh yeah. No, it's valid. You look at and for him, you mentioned how, hey, he'll go down to the minors and obviously, he'll play down there. And he spent almost 6 seasons essentially in the American League with a few cups of coffee up and down before he came back to the NHL. So he's done it before, Rich. At the same time, when you have a player going through all of that with the experience of it, is it more, you say, hey, like, you don't want to wait till they ask for help, because most people don't ask for help. That's just a fact in life. So do you have to be more proactive when a player clears waivers and is going to the minors when they're a veteran player than you would normally?
Oh, there's always lots of conversation the day of waivers. Have you heard anything? Have you heard anything? And we never know for sure, because sometimes teams don't want to tell you because they're farther back in the pack and they don't want it out there. So they're a little reluctant to say. They might tell you they're interested. We didn't call anybody this time because we just evaluated this is the spot that he's going to play some playoff games and win. And it made more sense to be, not to be proactive, but sure, we talked a lot. Calvin's pretty established, settled guy. So he's not really panicking, more curious than anything else. And, I talked to him after, just to see how he's doing, so that's maybe a bit unusual. And he was more calm than I was probably about it. And, he's just got a lot of confidence. He knows what he can do. And I think when you're confident with you, these things don't shake you. I remember one time when Hillary Duff was married to Mike Comrie, that she went over to talk to Mike prior to the game when he was working on his stick, and she, I remember saying to her that they were all nervous. I said, well, one time I went to Detroit, right? Young Steve Yzerman grabbed me at the door because Kenny Holland was doing an interview on the bench. I am very uncomfortable being around the room. I mean, I don't think agents should be there, but Steve brought me there. I'm standing waiting for Ken to finish his interview. And the guys are coming out for the warm up, and they're giving me fist pumps. I know half of them. I'm like, Kenny, we got to get out of here. And then Babcock comes out, grabs me in, and Brad McCrimmon was there. One of the last times I saw Beast, and big hug, seeing of everything. I said, and I was explaining the difference between the great teams and the also rans is they can't handle any interruption in the pattern. They panic. And the Red Wings they just do what they do. They were organized. And I remember saying to Hillary when my kids went to her concert, I asked her, how close to your show did you talk to us? And she said, I don't know. I went up a minute before it started. And I said, yeah, because you were ready. And I think that's a real problem with teams that are fragile. They need glue guys like Calvin. And these guys do a lot of cool things. I don't a lot of people realize. It's an unusual environment here, and these guys have built a great culture. They love each other. Like a lot of people don't realize, they live literally 4 or 5 minutes away from each other. These guys are oftentimes on a nice day. They know the traffic on the completely destroyed Stony Plain Road is sometimes a challenge to get to work. They all run to work together because they live 2 or 3 minutes from each other. If you're playing in New Jersey, you might be 50 minutes from your player. So when you interrupt a culture, like you can't keep a player because he's a great guy and he's not performing, but you got to ask yourself, I think, more questions than they've asked themselves of the value of this particular player to this particular team. And it's why guys get 2 or 3. It's why some guys are signing these $3-4 million deals like Foligno in Chicago, because that's what they do is valuable. It's why Corey Perry got a couple $1 million from Ken Holland. What he does is valuable. I mean, take Corey Perry and Calvin Pickard out of the lineup in the playoffs the last 2 years, and where are you? I don't like it.
Take a quick break. We'll come back more on the business of sport. Jason Gregor, Rich Winter here on Sports 1440, Oilers Nation, YouTube, Facebook, X, and Instagram. We continue on. Jason Gregor, Rich Winter, the business of sports here on Sports 1440. And Rich, it's kind of a unique season because there's a 3-week break, except if you're playing at the Olympics. Small percentage of players that are over there, of course, the 750, 800 players in the league. But for a lot of them, when they come back, there's either 4 or 5 games. It's basically, I guess you get back for practice. I could say, it's about 17 days. But, for those who come back from the Olympics later on, it's like 10 days. Most of those guys aren't getting traded. But, there's lots of players. I'm sure you have some guys who are pending UFAs, and, we're getting into trade deadline talk. So as because I know that I'll use Evander Kane, and I know he's not your client, but they're like, hey, you know what? They've given Evander Kane's agent, say, hey, you can explore trade possibilities. Yeah. Like, have you been in a situation like that as an agent before? And does it, wouldn't the GMs know anyway? What's the benefit of having, quote, permission to try to facilitate a trade? What do you do as an agent in that regard?
Well, quite often, and most times, not all the time, we know the players better than they do. I mean, in fairness to them, they're watching 1,500 players. I always tell players, when we make these calls in these kind of situations, General Manager X isn't lying in bed thinking about you. Now, he might be, but he may not. He may have some questions about character in this particular instance for obvious reasons, but he may have interest in learning about an injury. How bad is it? What are you thinking? And then they may just want to talk about next year in some cases. So, it's just having that personal contact. Like, we don't talk to each other as much as you would think. And you get on the phone for 15 minutes. I remember Stan, I got to get Stan on to tell this story sometime, because Michael Roosevelt wanted to follow in Marion Host's footsteps. He wanted to win. He'd made a lot of money. So he made the decision that he wanted me to pursue teams that we identified where he could win a cup. They were Chicago and Detroit at that time. And I worked all summer on Stan, showed him the statistics, went through all kinds of things. Finally, an hour, 2 hours before the market closed, when they had the lockout on September 15th that year, he phoned me and said, will you take $1.8 million? He said, my guys don't want to do it. I buy what you're selling. I agree with you. And he says to this day that remember when Duncan Keith got suspended for a game in the playoffs? They're in LA, 2-2. Rosie goes in and plays as good a game as they could imagine. I mean, Rosie scored 50 points in the league before. He's not he's a pretty good player. And he played the game of his life. Ken says, or Stan said, without his performance that game, I don't think we win. And if we go back home down 3-2, I don't like our chances of winning that series. So there are times when we know more about the players than the scouts do. And sometimes it takes 3 or 4 calls or more. I must have talked Stan 30 times over the course of summer. Every time you see my number, I'm sure he was, wanting to throw the phone in the toilet. But eventually, you provide them with enough information. They don't necessarily understand them, And the same thing with Rosie was interesting because in Phoenix the year before, I got a call from the defensive coach asking me if he thought Rosie still wanted to play in the NHL. Now, Rosie's a real quiet, understated guy, not a great skater, but if you want to hit someone with the biscuit from the goal line at the red line, Rosie's as good as anybody that's ever played. But, they run into all these biases, I think he's getting a little slow. Well, and he's quiet, so maybe he's slow and he doesn't care. And then they start thinking about it too much. So maybe these calls that we make interrupt that thought pattern. Yeah, I never thought, Rich mentioned this. Have we thought about that? Have we looked at that? These guys don't make the right decisions, or all those guys I just described wouldn't have 6 Vezinas and 2 MVPs. I mean, I had a guy who cleared waivers twice that these guys in this league could have had for $2,500, and a year later they would have had a 6-time Vezina Trophy winner, a 2-time league MVP. They don't know. In that case, it was that goofy style that Hasek kid had. He'll never be able to do it at the NHL level, but no different than Giordano, Norris Trophy winner, never drafted. Like, how did they miss him? And even I had lunch with breakfast with Bill Guerin the other day. I said, if you thought Kirill Kaprizov was as good as he was, would you have drafted him in the 5th round? I don't think so. This isn't an exact science. They're not that great at their job. They draft core players at the rate of 12.3%, which I don't know how anybody accepts that as or takes that as acceptable, but they don't have the information they need to make sound decisions. So our job is to try and give them information that might, Einstein used to say, you change the way you look at things and the things you look at change. And sometimes, yeah, maybe. Yeah. Okay. That's a good point. And
it's like a sales pitch a little bit to say, hey, this is what my client does better than maybe you think. There are instances, I'm sure, where, now obviously salary cap factor comes into play, right? So you look and say, hey, you know what? Okay, well, this guy's carrying this much cap. Okay, the team that's holding him, he'll probably retain, because it's, that's just how it works in the salary cap era, especially for a pending UFA. When you have guys, though, that are, you don't have permission to seek, but will the GM come to you and say, okay, Rich, you know what? We're looking to trade your client. Does he tell you in advance? And do you tell the client, or do you hold off and not have them worry about it?
It's funny because so many times they'll say, well, don't say anything. But of course, I'm kind of bound by fiduciary obligations to actually tell them. I can't hold that back. But it's, they'll come to you. I have a pretty good relationship. I mean, it's funny, we keep seeing all these guys recycled. Well, they didn't have to recycle the agents. We just never left, and so we've all known each other, 20, 25 years. I think when all the dynamics changed was when they got the salary cap. Because in the old days, when an Esa Tikkanen wasn't signed, or, you knew they had more money, right? They'll give you wait long enough. They'll lose 5 games. Now, when a guy says, I got $2 million, Rich, you look on the Puckpedia and, he's got $2 million. So the dialogue became less contentious. And I think we'd be much more collaborative over time. And yeah, they'll usually give you a heads up. I talked to Stan 2 or 3 days, and he said, he wasn't really sure what he was doing. It was at the time when Ingram was a few days away from not having to be exposed to waivers. He wasn't, and I think in that particular case, it's still being decided day to day. But sometimes it's, the most interesting thing this year, I thought, at the trade deadline for me was I had a couple of guys who are sort of bubble guys, right? Both cleared waivers. Okay, and I phoned the GM because the guys, they cleared waivers, but they weren't eligible to have the whole break, right? Mm-hmm. And both of them have young kids, and so they're calling me to say, hey, where am I going, right? And it was just interesting. In both cases, the GMs were saying, we can't send him down. We can't afford to get him hurt. With all the games coming. We played him 35 games this year. We're going to need him. He's not in our top 6, but he's our 7, and we don't like number 8. So I found it interesting this year that all the bubble kids got Bermuda and Hawaii vacations because The teams just didn't want to risk losing them in this this sort of compressed season. So that was good for the guys. It's a lot more fun to call them back and say, you're not going to Albany, you're going to Bermuda.
Right. Yeah.
But in that case, it was also interesting because Tom Fitzgerald, in that one particular case with Colton White, his view was like, I want to get him down there now and play the game now. He's still in good, he's not lost any conditioning. I don't want to risk him getting hurt. So they still had to play the one game. So I thought it made sense. Play now. The risk of getting hurt has got to be lower than playing, in 10 to 15 days. So, teams are trying to manage a very unique situation in this season in a different way they would normally. Otherwise, they just send them down and bury them,
Yeah. And what about preparing? Like, I know this is a long ways away, but I'm kind of curious about arbitration. And, because I'm sure you kind of have an idea for players on that. When do you start preparing your arbitration? Do you wait until, because I would assume you don't just wait till the team file, because if you're going to file, you're going to plan well ahead, right? Like you're starting, like, do you wait until right after the trade deadline? Because then you're like, okay, now my guys can't move pretty much. So I'm pretty much set. I focus on that. Or is it a year-long thing? How does arbitration preparation work?
Well, you don't really. Well, you start usually after the trade deadline, sometime after that. And what you'll do first is, there's Roland Lee at the Players Association, been there for a long time. He oversees, and that's his expertise. It's a narrow field in which he's an absolute genius in. And the first call is, Roland, what are you thinking? Because you see, it's not the way the arbitration process works. It's like putting your house on the market. You got to figure out what the comparables are. And so the way it starts generally is, first we've got to look at, who do we think's kind of going to be a comparable in this? And it starts with age of house, age, experience of player. Because you're not comparing a guy with 800 games, a guy with 200 games. So you go through that, and then you look at other filters for defensemen and forwards, ice time, points, time on ice defensively, offensively. And then you come up with a group of players that you look comparable. And then you go, oh my gosh, we got to get that guy out of there. That's horrible contract. What idiot did that one? So then you try and massage the sort a little bit so he's not included. Like maybe he played 202 games and the sort captured him because we went 25% games played career. So now we go 20% games played. Now we really like this sort, right? Now we go, okay, it's captured the guy at the top end. Now we know we're not getting the top end, but we'd rather have him giving us less than the top end than trying to get the arbitrator to see more than the bottom end. So you play around with it, but you've got to be somewhat consistent. You can't make any sense. You can't go like 50% above in ice time and 2% below. So you work through all of those things over the course of the next month or so. You get a pretty good feeling. Then you're talking to the teams and they're going through theirs. And of course, their lawyers have given them a different sort. So they're looking at the guy at the bottom and thinking we're going to get screwed with that guy. And then we work through all of that. And it's a process like no different than your house. And you come down to it, you get to arbitration day and say, okay, these houses are both built around the same time. So the same age, right? They all have the same features. Well, this guy has a nicer backyard. This one's got, this guy's smaller backyard, but remember he's got the pool and it's not an exact science. And I think the most fun I ever had at arbitration was in the Thomas Tatar filing, because the lawyer and I, Bernie and I have worked together a lot on a variety of different cases. And we went in and we made a gutsy call. We had about 4 players that were in our what we call the comparable list. And we just looked at it and went, Galchenyuk? Like they're twins, man. So we decided to go in the arbitration and we just said, Mr. Arbitrator, we can do this, little, almost as much as him, a little bit more than him. And here's a twin, man. Like, this is who he is. And if you looked at the stats, they were frighteningly identical. And ask Kenny about that arbitration sometime, because it's the only time he went. And we killed him. Like, we absolutely destroyed him. And the reason I know that is because we didn't have an agreement at the end of the arbitration. And when the arbitration was finished under the previous CBA, you could negotiate up until the time you got a decision. So I remember phoning Ken and saying, you want a deal because then you're going to be able to trade him if you have some term. We want a longer term deal, but we better hurry, man. Like, our arbitration was Thursday. This guy has an arbitration on Saturday. He's done a number of offensive players. He's not going home and doing his, taking 2 days. We could get this in 24 hours. So I called can we negotiate a deal? And we sent in the confirmation to the league and the PA that we have a deal. Problem was, it was the arbitrator sent the deal 5 to 10 minutes after we sent ours in. So they hadn't notified him yet that you're not supposed to do it. So in that one case, we actually knew what the arbitrator was going to decide. I think Ken asked for 3.1 and we asked for 4.2 and we got 4. So we know we killed them, which was good. But the other thing I do in arbitration, which I don't know of any other agent to do, because I want this process to be harmonious, right? Like, so what I do, I always it surprises new GMs. I'll phone them up a couple days before arbitration. We file their briefs. It looks like we're going to kill each other in 2 days. And I say, so talking to Thomas, you guys want to go for dinner night before the arbitration? Okay, sure, yeah, sure. And then I play a little game with the players. How long? Because we're not going to talk about the arbitration. How long will it take for the GM to bring up the arbitration? Or bring up the negotiation? Like, oh, you sure you don't want to do a deal? And Lou Lamoriello wins because he didn't bring it up until we were getting our cars at the valet. So that was pretty impressive. But, it's you try and manage these processes. And I think it's, people talk about, I don't want to go to arbitration. They'll beat you up. That doesn't really happen anymore. They now one time one of my clients got absolutely destroyed in a character assassination by a lawyer.
Which client?
Martin Straka.
Okay.
Bad character, not a leader. And in that time, we could renegotiate. I actually led to the change in the CBA that prevented a renegotiation because I phoned Craig Patrick and said, Craig, I'm going to take that brief and what your lawyer just said about Martin Straka, who's like the Calvin Pickard of Pittsburgh at that time, the most loved guy, a sweetheart of a guy, and I'm just going to put that in the Pittsburgh Tribune. Craig, that arbitration decision wasn't decided on the facts. That was decided on a bull-faced line. Craig's a good guy, and he just went, and he'd offer us 4 times 4 the night before. We go see, we're all in the PA office doing the last minute preparation, right? Goodenhow comes in and says, where are you guys at? 4 times 4. Oh, that's ridiculous. Go to arbitration. Now, Marty's kind of a quiet, nice guy. And he goes, I guess we're going then. He didn't want to go. So what we were able to do, because the rules were different, I went back to Craig and said, Craig, he's not going to be at camp unless we get the 4 times 4 back, because I'm not letting this young man get an arbitration award based on what your lawyer just did, which has unethical written all over it. And Craig said, fair deal. So he got 4 times 4.
So you went to arbitration, but you just went with the exact same deal you'd agreed upon before the arbitration hearing.
Yeah, the night before. So I had a little.
Because nowadays that wouldn't be allowed, right? Like nowadays, once you go to arbitration, once you sit in that room and it starts, you no, that's not true. You can still, even if you go through the arbitration rule, you have 24 hours.
No. So when I did the Straka deal, you could negotiate anytime. You could renegotiate your deals all the time. Remember, you could negotiate in the middle of the season. I remember when I got Ron Hextall as a client, he had just signed a 6-year deal with Mr. Eagleson, and we renegotiated. But so in that case, you could, and then until recently, you could negotiate a deal up until the arbitrator's decision was in. Then they changed the rule. Now you got to have it done. You have to you can't negotiate after the briefs are submitted.
Oh, okay.
And that's why guys go, because that's why settlement happens a little early, because that's a little nerve-wracking, right? Now, for you to sit back now, once you've heard our case, you've listened to the arbitrator's questions. Everybody feels like you hear about the Supreme Court in the United States. I listen to the argument. It seems like they're leaning this way. Well, you start to get that feel during an arbitration, and it makes it a little easier for maybe a team to move back to a number closer to where we are, because we did a great job, or they did a pretty good job. But before, it's like a coin flip. Like, you don't know what's in their brief. You don't know how they're going to, attack the whole argument. So I think it's a huge incentive to do a deal. I think we've only had one arbitration the last 3 or 4 years. Like, I don't remember anybody other than Trennan when he was with his previous agent go to arbitration.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've seen briefs from both sides, right, on players that say, okay, this is who we're going to bring up as who a comparable is, and then the other side brings up their guys, and sometimes there's usually one on each side, and so that guy kind of evens out because they both. Right.
Those are the ones the arbitrator pays the most attention to, because he goes, okay, if you agree that Gregor's a comparable for Connor Halley, okay, then okay, you agree on that one, so he'll put more weight on that usually.
Yeah. So you try to probably avoid that unless it's the one that you really think's the best comparable. What I found though in some of the cases is how different, and you can find a certain number on either side that'll be like, okay, this is what I really find comparable, right? And obviously, as you said, you want to try to sell it in a way. You're selling it to the arbitrator as to why your client is as closely resembling, client A or player A, exhibit A in this case, right? That's essentially what you do.
But you're limited. Anybody can look this up if anybody has nothing else to do and they're interested in this stuff. You can actually look in the CBA online, and it tells you the criteria we can use. Like, we can't bring up news stories and all. It's got to be, it's ice time and takeaways and giveaways and games played and all that kind of games.
And it's really only the previous 2 years, right? Like the most recent year is
valuable. No. You first you go with career, because obviously that sets the tone for the whole discussion, and then the last year becomes the most important.
Yeah.
We call it the platform year, right? You're jumping off into a new contract, and that particular year is important because it's the most recent indicator of his value. Now, we all know that sometimes it's maybe not a real indicate. Andrew Mangiapane got 5.8 from his last deal that we did, and had a great year. And sometimes you ought to be careful. This is where, like, we killed Calgary in that arbitration because they didn't do their homework. And so we looked at the goals scored. Now, this isn't something we can argue in arbitration, but Andrew scored 13 broken play goals the year he got 35. 13. Mm-hmm. Those generally aren't replicable. Look at the year that Pasternak, I think, got 48 or 50 or whatever he got. He got 17 broken play goals in that year. And then the next year it slips. You got to be incredibly aware of the type of goals your player scored. So I looked at that and went, well, let's get as long a term as you really feel you need to be comfortable, because this is a problem. It's not going to happen again. And it didn't. And, thank goodness they didn't do their homework. And we did. And Andrew took home $5.8 million.
Yeah. So 35 goals, 13 of them, or did you say, or 12 were broken?
13 broken plays. So he's really a 20 goal scorer.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And if you look at his career, that makes perfect sense. But they obviously didn't dive in deep enough to it. And broken play.
Maybe that's why they traded for Carlo and gave up a first-round pick and their best prospect. Sometimes they don't do their homework.
Yeah, it's very true. We'll come back, Rich Winter. When we return, recruiting efforts for college players and others, it's entering that season. We'll get on that and how the agent discusses that with teams coming up next on the Gregor Show, presented by PlayAlberta.ca. We continue on the business of sports with Rich Winter. And Rich, of course, you look at the recruiting time is up now. For whether it's, teams and trades, but more so, recruiting lots of NCAA free agents, and you've had lots of them over the years. And now, for me personally, I have argued that one of the more overrated prospects in hockey has become the UFA college player, and good for them. But teams will trip over him. They'll give him hey, we'll give you a contract. You play one game, you burn your year of eligibility, then you go back in. And I get why the theory that they think that's great. Sometimes I look and say, yeah, but you're only getting one game of actual salary for that year. And then, like, there's no guarantee that you're going to get another big raise afterwards. Sometimes maybe taking a 2-year deal can be better, and it varies from player to player. Yeah. So what do you find, like, do you talk to the players? Because I get why everybody always thinks best case scenario. You know what? I'm going to get this burnt out so I can play a good rookie year, and then I'm going to get a better contract the next year. But when I look at it historically, there's not a lot of guys that really hit it big that first year because the NHL is very, very difficult. So how do you approach it? Is it always best to burn the year, or sometimes, because we see some guys do it and some guys don't?
Well, yeah, I guess it's more strategic than that in my mind. I know other agents seem to be focused on that burn. I'm focused on trying. Trivia question: which were the only 2 locally born brothers that played on the same NHL team in Canada? And then I'll tell you the story that relates to this.
From Edmonton?
No, who are the Canadian-born players, born and raised in an NHL city, that both played with their hometown team?
Oh, geez, I have no idea. Who?
Mike and Paul Comrie.
Okay.
But that leads into this story because Paul was a late pick, and to me, there's two things that are really important. There, got a young man at Denver, not sure what the pace of the game is, but more importantly, he doesn't know what he's competing against. So in that particular case, we signed an AHL tryout contract because I made the case to Paul that if he plays in Hamilton back then, and sees who the competition is, like who are you fighting for a job with next year? What do you have to beat? That gave him a look. I think he played 8 or 10 games. I have to go back and look, and he made the orders. It was a 7th-round pick. Now he would have had a career. He might have been the best Comrie, speedy, skilled, but then he got that concussion fairly early. But he made the team out of training camp. So I'll look at, like, we have Ellis Rickwood this year. A young man that played in Clarkson last year. I don't particularly like the portal. But in this case, we felt it was important for him to get to a better conference, and he's playing for North Dakota, more than a point a game, and the interest level is very high. He's a 6'2", 200-pound centerman.
Yeah,
I mean, we'll care about the one game because why wouldn't you? Because not only does it get you out of your deal, it gets you 1 year closer to someone else deciding your contract in arbitration. So it's valuable. But if that's what you're focused on, that's crazy. You've got to focus on. And we've talked to a couple teams in Ellis's case. They think they're not thinking about the one game. They think he can play maybe for them right now. Okay. How many 200-pound centermen that are more than a point a game in North Dakota are there available? So he's a late bloomer. So a lot of the work is done. I mean, like a lot of the work we had to make, my partner Todd handled that, but Todd and Ellis had to make the decision to make the move to Clarkson last year, right? Last fall. And that's probably the decision that's more important, as important as the one we make today. So, yeah, I mean, I'm like you. I'm like, I don't get the Bernie. I mean, I get the Bernie year, but not in a bad spot. It's not the most important thing, but it's important. But at the end of the day, but it's the same as everybody overpays in free agency. It doesn't matter if it's on July 1st or it's college free agents because, it's a natural. If you study behavioral science, it's a natural. Daniel Kahneman wrote a phenomenal book, the treatise, really. He and Amos Tversky won the Nobel Prize for economics, two psychologists. But people are more fearful. They react more to things that are cause them fear or pain than they do with pleasure and satisfaction. So in those cases, it's like free agents. They just don't want to lose them. Hey, Jason, let me tell you, I'm not going to pick up the phone and talk to Pittsburgh if you'll do this. Oh,
yeah.
Oh, geez, the guy's going, hey, you got the guys in the room. Guys, like, we got them if we can just do this. Oh, we can't do that. The owner's going to kill us. And they do it. because it's just that fear. So, I mean, we're pretty good at playing off of that because maybe Pittsburgh wasn't even calling, right? But that's the nightmare in free agency. I always tell people there's three kinds of robberies that could potentially occur outside of a bar or in this particular case. If a guy has a gun and asks for your wallet, you give it to him, right?
Yeah.
No questions asked. If the bouncer tell you got some nutcase out there, he waves his plastic gun around, just ignore him. We've had him here for years. He's a little off center. You don't give him your wallet, right? But if the guy says, I'm not sure if that guy has a real gun, or a plastic gun, well, you still give him your wallet. And so you never have to actually shoot anybody or bring a real gun to the table or have an option. They just have to think you do. Now, Every general manager who ever listens to this show now is going to call my bluff probably for the next 5 years. So that probably wasn't a very good move, but it's really true. And because they just don't know. It's a nightmare. You go into free agency and think you're going to have 5 teams and you get to like 3 p.m, you get really none. And then somebody calls on a player, you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're getting 5.6. I mean, I thought we were going to go jobless. So it is, you have to learn to play your cards as effectively as you can. I think one thing that people won't think, I always say this all the time, GMs have said to me many times, oh, you guys always want your players overpaid. I go, no. I never want my player overpaid. Never. Because I think there's a range for a player that's reasonable.
Yeah.
Where it's a little high, but we're not thinking of trading him. Kids aren't getting beat up at school because his dad makes too money. He's not contributing. And then if it's the lower end, it's a little low, but I'm not getting fired. Like if you're in that range, I want to be the upper end of that range, but you're in that range, Yeah, everybody's pretty happy. Believe me, the most disappointed, frustrated players I've ever represented were making too much money. Fans were all over them. I mean, I think Brizgalov's life was fun when he got that $10 million a year deal in Philadelphia. Now he's pretty happy after they bought him out, and he made $40 million for 2 years. So that was kind of a nice pill to take to calm the problem. But it's, they're very unhappy if they're underpaid and will usually get fired. So you don't hear much about that. But it's a very difficult problem for a guy who has a lot of pride to be exposed to the abuse that you get when you're overpaid. It's not fun.
Yeah. Oh, but I know, and you've mentioned that, and I would agree wholeheartedly with it. The problem is, and I know that, hey, players aren't going to turn it down. If someone really wants to overpay you, what are you going to do as an agent? You know what? I think you should take less long term. Now I know that Marian Hossa did it for 1 year, and that's fine, but that was
different reasons. But if somebody believe me, but then, but then,
and it was only 1 year deal, right? Because he's an elite player and he knew he was going to get a big term. Some of these guys, if you're a mid-tier guy and someone wants to overpay you, you're like, dude, this is life-altering money, so I'm going to take it. And then you hope to think that you can perform to it, but obviously there's lots of times where it doesn't. And I think that is a good point. Now you mentioned something there, Rich, that we haven't touched on. We only have a few minutes left, but the fact that you have lots of now WCHL players and they go to college and you have it's basically free agency every year now in NCAA. That's what it's become, right? I don't think it's great, to be honest, for the sport or for the players, really, because you might be in a good situation. Your guy thinks he's a good situation. Then the portal opens up and suddenly, you're at Penn State and now they go out and grab 2 other guys. And suddenly your guy who is a second liner is now a third liner. Is like, what the hell? So how can you count, like, when that portal's open, will you know if one of your players is going to get squeezed out and then he has chance to react or not really?
Not really, no. But I think, that's a challenge. The thing that's been a lot more fun than I ever thought it would be. I had a young man and Russian player in Calgary a couple of years ago, Max Mironov, pretty good player, like good speed, plays hard. And the call I made to him and said, so Max, would you like to go to college? I've got a full ride for you. It's a small university. I think it's probably pretty good for you. Niagara University. It's near Niagara Falls by Toronto there. And, what's the scholarship? Like, he had no idea. And the craziest thing is Jason, he's there. I think he was their leading scorer till he got a little bit of a ding, but he's right up there. He's playing great. And he's at the top of his class, having taken school in Russia and never took much of anything here while he was here. And I couldn't believe it. I've had so much fun. He's a wonderful young guy. And I asked him what he's taken, like Phys Ed 101. Like, what are you taking? Chemistry, biology, math, calculus. I'm going, I would have intimidated the daylights out of me when I was his age. But it's been interesting to see. So we've got young Finney there from the Oil Kings playing with Max. And so it's just a whole different world. And I think it's been interesting because it's terrible. The portal's terrible in so many ways. There's no loyalty at all anymore. It sucks. But there's been a lot of interesting opportunities for people that wouldn't have got it. Now, Max ends up playing in the NHL, possible. That's great. But if he comes out of there with a North American university degree and ultimately things settle down in Russia, he's going to be a very valuable guy to an American oil company, when they come over, and I'm sure the alumni will take care of that. So it's been really, really, really interesting. Even as old Billets told me the other day, because they're friends with my daughter, they said, and I couldn't believe it, Max is even doing all those courses and he's reading an extra book for pleasure. So there's just been a lot of human interest things that have grown out of this that we don't think about. That are, they're satisfying to me, especially because I love this guy. He's just a wonderful young man, and his life is going to be changed because of the change in the role.
Yeah, that's true.